Hey everybody, so I wanted to close out the night with a video that was a little more positive, and I wanted to tell the story of how I met Haruki Murakami. So one of my longtime viewers was asking me about my love of Haruki Murakami, and I mentioned that I met him, and she wanted to know, well, oh my God, how did that happen? And I thought, well, that's actually a pretty cool story, so I'll tell everybody instead of just her. So here it is. First of all, yes, I am a huge Haruki Murakami fan. Observant fans of my channel will have already noticed all of the Haruki Murakami books right here behind me. You can see everything from Killing Commendatore to Kafka on the Shore, Dance, 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 Blind Willow, Sleeping Woman, and everything else. The only Murakami book I have not read is Underground. That's not really one of his literary works. That was a work of investigative journalism he did, so it's kind of a different thing. I still want to read it though, but I've got everything up there, all the books, and yeah, I am a super huge Haruki Murakami fan. And just on the other side of this bookshelf, you can see I have my other favorite Japanese author, Yukio Mishima, and I feel like given their political affiliations, it's only right that Murakami be on the left-hand side of the bookshelf and Mishima be on the far right. But anyway, and then yes, I also, as you can tell, have an appreciation for Jimi Hendrix, the Notorious B.I.G., Linus Van Pelt, Pinkie Pie, and Rainbow Dash. And I also like Sugar Skulls from, Dia de Muertos and all of that. So anyway, but Murakami is one of my all-time favorite authors. In fact, he is my second favorite author, second only to Harlan Ellison, and all the books up here are my Harlan Ellison collection. And yes, this is a Virtual Boy right here. I have no idea whether or not it still works, and rest assured it would not matter if it did. But anyway, so yeah, I'm a huge Murakami fan. So how did I meet him? Well, it's kind of a cool story, and to set it up, I'll tell you a little bit about how I discovered Murakami. So it began when I was in college. I really went hard in my interest in Japanese culture. And it started with things like a lot of people, it started with things like anime and stuff like that. And I had always had an affinity for Japanese animation. I was in the first generation that really got a lot of Japanese animated content imported into the United States. I grew up with like Nickelodeon and early Nickelodeon and Nick Jr. and it would import a lot of anime and stuff like that. Things we don't even think about, like shows like Noozles and the Little Koala and stuff like that. And so all through that, I'd always had an appreciation for anime. Now I know that's cliche, but I want to point out that what really got the ball rolling, though, I developed an interest in some of the more cerebral stuff like Neon Genesis Evangelion, Big O. The Big O is my favorite anime, stuff like that. And I read a really good book called Anime by Susan J. Napier. This book is actually a really good academic deconstruction of anime, and so I went through, and I'd already fallen in love with a lot of the major feature films of anime, like Ghost in the Shell and Akira and that sort of thing. I saw Ghost in the Shell 2: Innocence in the theater. That was an incredible experience. But anyway, this book touched off anime was one facet of it, but I always had just a fascination with Japan, the history of Japan, the culture of Japan, and that sort of thing in general. I read that, and that really got my gears turning about Japanese culture in general. And so I got the first like Japanese novel that I just read I can remember just reading for the fun of it out of genuine interest was the legendary, nay infamous, Battle Royale by Koshin Takami, the book that Suzanne Collins fully, intentionally, and with complete knowledge of the wrongness of her actions plagiarized for the Hunger Games. no, it's not a direct one-to-one ripoff, but there's too much. The books have way too much in common for it to be an accident. But anyway, so the actual novel Battle Royale, most people just think of the movie with Beat Takeshi Kitano, but the book Battle Royale, that was life changing for me. I loved that book, and it was so fascinating. I just fell in love with it, and I read it on one of my summer vacations home from Berkeley, and I was enthralled. And that made me want to deep dive into Japanese culture. And I did this big deep dive in everything, just everything Japanese culture, literature, music, everything else. You know, my favorite director at the time, this in the early 2000s when I was in college, like everything Japanese. My favorite, I love J-horror. My favorite director was Takashi Miike and you know, Kiyoshi Kurosawa and all of those guys. I was in love with all of that. My favorite actress was Ku Shibasaki and everything else, and just everything Japanese. My favorite band was Psy, S-I-G-H, not P-S-Y. But Psy, and to this day, Imaginary Sonicscape by Psy is my #3 favorite album after Dream Theater, Scenes from a Memory, and Rush Moving Pictures. I like it that much, love it that much. So anyway, it was just everything Japanese, everything. On a side note, when Imaginary Sonicscape came out, I actually found Mirai Kawashima's email address at the time and emailed him and said, I'm like, I'm a Berklee College of Music student and I want to play guitar on one of your projects. And he said, oh, send me some of your playing. And then I can't wait to hear it. And I couldn't get the file format he wanted to work out. And like an idiot, I just gave up at that point because I'm such a fucking moron. But anyway, so this was very much my field of interest. I had even developed, and I know this is getting into 7 minutes and you want to hear how I met Haruki Murakami, but anyway, I had developed this huge interest, and I even had started teaching myself conversational Japanese. I had, and Berkeley had a huge, this is Berkeley in Boston, the music school, not in California if you're just joining us, but Berkeley had a huge Japanese population. I became really good friends with a really amazing saxophone player named Yohei Kobayashi, who is now a film and television composer over in Japan, and he does all kinds of stuff now. And he posts his projects, and man, he's got some serious shit going on. I see what he's doing on Facebook and stuff like that. He is an incredible saxophone player. Like, I've played gigs with him, man. He's amazing. I introduced him at a gig one time as the Beast from the East, but he thought that was funny, but he was like red in the face, embarrassed. But anyway, he and I used to, every Wednesday, we had a thing where we would meet. There was this pizza place we both liked, and we would meet up for pizza on Wednesdays and have dinner and talk in Japanese, and he would help me practice my Japanese chatting that way and everything. And he introduced, remember, he introduced me to one of his friends one time that looked exactly like Ichi the Killer, and he's like, yeah, the guy's like, yeah, all my friends think I look like Ichi the Killer. And so it's funny. But anyway, so into that tableau of interests. This was right when Murakami put out Kafka on the Shore, which is considered now one of his great classics. But Kafka on the Shore was new at the time, and my dad sent me an article about Haruki Murakami. I had seen the book sitting on the shelf, like the hardcover sitting on the shelf in Barnes & Noble, but I had not gotten into it further than that. My dad sent me this article about Haruki Murakami, and knowing that I like Japanese stuff, and just like, hey, have you heard about this? And I was so fascinated by what I read. I was just like, I have to experience this. One of the books they described was, where's theirs? Oh, sorry, Jimmy. One of the books they described was this book, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. And I was so entranced by the idea. If you haven't read it, I don't want to... It's hard to summarize in a way that doesn't give it away, but it's It's basically, it's like a cross. It's one of the most unique and bizarre and beautiful novels you'll ever read. And it's like a cross between Neuromancer and the Chronicles of Narnia. Like, it's extraordinary what he does with this book. And, um, and it's, I've always wanted to see it be made into a movie, and I always thought that Yorgos Lanthimos would be the ideal director to do it. Um, but it's about this, the odd number chapters are about this man in near future Japan who has had this some sort of surgical implant put into his brain that allows him to do like hyper super complex. He's basically got like a supercomputer planted in his brain that allows him to do like super complicated cryptological mathematical stuff and everything, and corporations employ him to encrypt their data and encrypt their information, so that it, for obviously for purposes of protecting against corporate espionage and all of that. And that's one side of the story. And then the even chapters are about this very strange, surrealistic, magical, pastoral, like mountain community. And I don't want to say anything more about it than that. This world full of magical unicorns, and it's just this magical place. And what these two places are and how they converge is the theme of the book. I read this. It's so funny. It's like at the time, I bought this book, and I bought the book By Any Other Name by Spider Robinson at the same time. And I bought that because Spider Robinson, I had just read Mind Killer by Spider Robinson, and as far as I'm concerned, Mind Killer bears the triumphant distinction of being the only good book Spider Robinson has ever written. But anyway, so I bought those two books together, and I went for the Spider Robinson book first, and I just couldn't focus on it. I had to get into this, and I read it, and oh my God, it transformed my world. Like, I cannot tell you how life-changing reading Murakami for the first time was for me. And so, one day, I was walking through the halls of the 150 Mass Ave building at the Berklee College of Music, and I saw a flyer announcing that Haruki Murakami would be making a public appearance, doing a lecture that was open to the public at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which was across the street from, across the river from Berkeley, in Cambridge. Berkeley's in Boston, and MIT's across the river in Cambridge. And so Murakami was going to be speaking there, and this just, blew my mind. And so the first thing I did was by this point, most of what you see on that shelf I already owned. So I had my parents ship all of these books up to me because on the misguided assumption that I would be able to get him to autograph them, which, highly, highly unlikely, obviously. And obviously everyone was there, but I went in the lecture hall with a giant, gym bag full of Murakami books to try to get signed. But anyway, so I heard that he was coming, and this was again while Kafka on the Shore was the hot new thing. And so I was very excited, and I had a number of Japanese friends at that point. So there was this one Japanese girl I thought was cute named Keiko, and I asked Keiko if she wanted to go see Murakami with me, and she did, but she wanted to bring her friend, who was named Keiko. And those two girls were actually referred to in our social circles. Those two girls were actually referred to as the Keikos. And so I took the Keikos, and I love how my story about meeting Haruki Murakami could be a story by Haruki Murakami. But anyway, I took the Keikos with me to go meet Haruki Murakami. And so, we took the bus. We took the bus across the bridge, the bridge across the Charles River to MIT. Now, the bridge, this is interesting, the bridge between Boston and Cambridge, the bridge that separates Boston and Cambridge that you take to get from Berkeley to MIT, is it's an interesting bridge because it's measured in smoots. And when I was there, and this was 20 some odd years ago, I assume the markings are still there. I would hope they are. But it was the bridge, either referred to as the Smoot Bridge or just the bridge that was measured in smoots. And a smoot is about a distance of, I think, about 5 feet and 8 inches or something like that. And it was because some MIT kids were crossing that bridge drunk one night, and their buddy passed out drunk on the bridge, and so they decided to drag him and the spray paint lines of demarcation for every time a length of his body was passed. So every like 5 feet 8 inches or whatever it is considered one smoot. And so I think the whole bridge is something like 200 and something smoots or something like that. But anyway, so and it has a halfway marker and smoots and everything like that too. So we crossed the Smoot Bridge, and I knew we needed to get there early. So we go to this place. They drop us off. We go to, I figured out the exact building, the minute we needed to be there, everything. We get there, and by this time it was already filling up. We get in, and we got seats, and we got some of the last seats at the very top of the lecture hall. This lecture hall probably had, like these typical lecture halls probably had about 300 or 400 seats, and it was one of the ones that has like the amphitheater style seating. They were gloriously unprepared for how big this was going to be. And so we got seats, and as more people started filing in, they started sitting on the floor. And it turned out that the line to get into this thing was now going out the door, down the block, and all the way back to the Charles River, which that was like 2 or 3 miles. Getting back to the Charles River Bridge of the line to get into this thing. Obviously, they turned most of these people away. So thank God we got seats when we did. We got in early, got seats. The Keikos and I were talking about going down and sitting on the floor because we thought, well, we could get closer that way. Thank God we didn't do that because the thing was so packed that the fire marshal sent in the police to start ordering the people who didn't have actual chairs, who were not in actual seats. They started ordering the overflow out the doors, like, you can't have this many people in here. And so thank God we got seats when we did. Now, I did feel really bad for some of these kids because what happened was, obviously not most, but a lot of these kids were Japanese. They spoke very little English, and you had these police officers getting up in their faces and yelling at them to get out of the room, and they didn't understand. They didn't know, what was being said or what the problem was and that kind of thing. And I felt really bad for them, like it was not fair. That someone should have translated to them what was going on. And they indeed had Japanese translators in there. In fact, Jay Rubin, the man who translates most of Haruki Murakami's books into English, was there. He could have very easily expressed to them what was going on. But anyway, that was a little unfair. But finally, they were able to get the hundreds and hundreds of angry angry latecomers out the door, and the thing actually began. Now, there is a video clip of this. It's very grainy footage, but I will include a link to it. There is a video of part of this, of Murakami speaking. So, they finally got that underway. The literature professor that introduced him said something that stayed with me about Murakami to this very day. He said that Haruki Murakami does not show us a world that does not exist, or a world that we don't see. He does not show us a world that we don't see. He shows us the world that we see every day and fail to realize that we are seeing. I love that line. That's such a perfect encapsulation of what Murakami is from a literary standpoint, and I love that. Murakami came out, and it's so the Keikos told me that they actually, as big of a fan, as big of fans as they were of Murakami, they did not know what he looked like. They said in Japan, there's no pictures of him on the books or anything, and so they did not actually know what he looked like. And in Japan, he's like J.D. Salinger, like he's such a recluse. He just remains hidden from the world, and he is a very, very quiet and private person in a country full of very, very quiet and private people. But he came out, and he was such a quiet, such this kind of mild mannered person, but instantly his personality, if you have read if you've read, the Wind Up Bird Chronicle is considered by many to be his magnum opus, with Kafka, either that or Kafka on the Shore are cited as being his magnum opuses. But if you've read the Wind Up Bird Chronicle, the character, the narrator of that, he is, it just like Murakami sounds exactly like the narrator of, and it's a narrative voice, a first person narrative voice that emerges in a lot of his writing, but it's kind of, I think, most frequently associated with the Wind Up Bird Chronicle. It felt like hearing that person, like seriously, it was the most surreal thing in the world. It was like that character had stepped out of the Wind Up Bird Chronicle and was now speaking to us in person. Like, that is Murakami, that character. Anyway, so the thing was, they wanted, like most things, they begin by doing a reading of a literary work by the author. So Murakami did a reading from Super Toad Saves Tokyo, which is in After the Quake. And I have to say, that was the only thing about the whole presentation I didn't like, was like they read a story that's like novella length. I mean, it was so long. You could have read one of his shorter stories and gotten the same effect. But what happened was, Haruki Murakami speaks fluent English, but he has an unbelievably thick Japanese accent, understandably so. But despite speaking fluent English, he has an insanely thick Japanese accent, and you really have to lean in and focus to hear what he's saying. And so you can hear it in that clip. But what they did was, he read the first couple of pages of the story in Japanese. Then he went back and read those same pages in English. And I was patting myself. I've lost I've lost all of my Japanese fluency. I remember a little of it, but at the time I was actually able to follow what was going on in those first two pages he had read, and I was like, "Fuck yes, this is awesome." It's my training is working. And by the way, you're going to ask what I use to learn. There's a program called Rosetta Stone that helped me out a lot. I would assume there's a modern day iteration of it, but I got Rosetta Stone and used that, and was very useful, very helpful. And anyway, he was, but I was able to follow a little of the story, and I thought that was great. But anyway, because he had such a thick accent, the rest of the story was read in English by one of the literary professors. And so that was kind of a bummer, because it was like, about 40% of the event was that guy reading that story. Like, we were there for Murakami, and we could have had so much more time with Murakami. And what was so interesting about it, though, was that he is, he's this literary giant, and he is someone who he has been don't get me started on the time he was shortlisted for the Nobel Prize and it went to Alice Munro. That's a whole other thing. But this is somebody that is regularly shortlisted for the Nobel Prize, somebody who is considered one of the creative literary greats of all time, a living legend in the world of literature. And he is the most he's just in person, he's like the most humble, unassuming, quirky little person. You would not think that this was Murakami, the Murakami, the literary giant that wrote Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, who wrote Kafka on the Shore and all these incredible books. You would not think that he was that person, or it was just this kind of interesting, quirky little guy. And he has. I keep doing this thing, by the way, because I was in the gym today, and I have like long-term issues in this shoulder that I'm constantly trying to massage out after I work out. Anyway, but but it was just incredible, talking or hearing him talk, and he has this great sense of humor. And I remember one story he told. He talked about what it was like to be this famous author, and how fame was kind of this weird anomaly to him and everything. And he thought, again, I'm gonna do my attempt at his accent, not to be disrespectful, but just to give you kind of a feeling for like the quirkiness and the humor of it and everything. But he says, one time I was in Tokyo subway, and I get on subway and I put my hand in the strap to, and train take off, and this beautiful woman comes up to me and says, "Are you Haruki Murakami?" And I think, hey, sometimes life is good, And I say, "Yeah, I'm Haruki Murakami." She says, "Your books have gotten worse." And so it was just funny, so interesting like that. And he said people, he said it's always, he's always humble, because people that know him just give him their direct opinion, so he doesn't, of his writing, so he doesn't have this like high opinion of himself. He said, "Friends tell me, hey Haruki, your book stinks," that sort of thing. And so that was so cool. So the Q&A came around, and I thought, well, I've got to ask him a question. And so I went up there and stood in like huge line, and I'm glad they got to me. Like I said, I was way at the back, but I got up there, and I remember the person in front of me. This cracked me up, or I inwardly cracked me up. It's so lame. But the person in front of me asked them. They said, "Okay, we drove for 5 hours to be here, and the whole drive up, we were asking ourselves, like, if we get to ask Haruki Murakami one question, what is it going to be? What's the one question?" And we decided it would be this: why do you always have characters making or eating spaghetti in your books? And he just said, "I like spaghetti." That was it. And I asked him when I got there. I said, I wanted you to talk. I said I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about music in your book. The music in your books and the way music influences your writing, specifically jazz. I introduced myself. I'm a music student, and I go to Berkeley and all of that. And I think that resonated with him, because he's written appreciatively about the Berkeley College of Music in the past. And in fact, in one of his stories, I believe it's in Blind Willow, Sleeping Woman, in fact, he talks about a time that he was at a record store that was right around the corner from the Berkeley College of Music. And it's funny, because I know exactly what records. It was Looney Tunes Records. I've been in there. I used to go in there, and this was back when the Residents didn't have a record deal, so I would go in there and try to find the out-of-print Residents albums and everything. But anyway, that was Murakami's. Murakami talked about that. I've been in that record store. I've probably probed through the same record bins that he was going through. But anyway, so I asked him, how does jazz, music in general, and jazz influence your writing? And he talked about, he said in terms of jazz, he talked about Uh, and I asked him also what were there any contemporary artists he really liked. I To the contemporary artist question, he said I really like Oasis, Oasis. Um, and talking about jazz, though, he said that jazz was so influential in his writing because he does not write to, excuse me, my neck is sore. He does not write to an outline. He doesn't go into his writing with anything planned out in the beginning. He writes in the moment. He does. He said he doesn't like to write to an outline. He can't write that way. He has to write in the moment. And his leading literary influence in that regard was jazz, was the language of jazz. And before being a writer, he owned a jazz club in Japan. Um, and so he's a huge, huge, huge jazz aficionado. And I used to put on. It's funny. I can tell you in some cases I can tell you what jazz albums I put on when I was reading what this is. I'm sorry, I'm breaking away from the Murakami thing, but like what jazz albums I listened to, like Dance Dance Dance. I listened to Miles in the Sky when I started reading. I was listening to that album when I started by Miles Davis when I started reading that. Things like that. Anyway, but he started talking about how he writes very much in the kind of mindset of like a jazz soloist. And I wish I could remember every word that he told me verbatim, but it was basically like talking about how he phrases his sentences and his paragraphs like jazz phrases, jazz lines, and everything. Like they have to have this specific arc to them and this specific focus on a certain beautiful turn of phrase and that sort of thing, they have to flow a certain way. But more so than that, everything is improvisational. He talked about how he puts himself in the mindset of a jazz soloist when he writes, because everything he's doing, he's improvising right in the moment. He plans nothing. And all of that comes from the spontaneity that all of that learned spontaneity comes from an appreciation of and an understanding of jazz. And I thought that was so cool. And then he also talked about how music, he's very aware of how music changes, your perspective on music changes over time. How he said when he said, talking about Norwegian Wood, for example, which is his. If you've not read Norwegian Wood, that's again, well, I recommend all of his stuff. But that was his famous coming of age novel that kind of put him on the map. And and he talked about how he said, when I was in high school, I did not like the Beatles. Now I look back, I love. All of a sudden, it's like he said something like, I hit 40, now I love the Beatles. And he was talking about how he talked some about that, about how your perception of music changes over time. I had an experience. Just a quick aside. I had an experience like that recently, where when I was in high school, the Goo Goo Dolls were one of the most popular rock bands on the planet. I hated them back then, and then just recently, out of nowhere, on like the radio or on my Apple Music that I was listening to, Slide by the Goo Goo Dolls came on, and all of a sudden, because it had this extraordinary nostalgic component to it, all of a sudden I just loved every minute of this song. Like and I relate to what he's saying, that all of a sudden, like now, because the perspective of time takes me back to that point in my life, and you don't really understand that until you're like 20 some odd years, 20 plus years removed from your childhood and your youth, and then now all of a sudden you really know what nostalgia feels like. But he talked about that, and he talked about the way his appreciation of the Beatles changed over time, and how that influenced the writing of Norwegian Wood. And so that was the discussion. My brief interaction with Haruki Murakami. Obviously, he didn't sign a single one of my books. They made clear that he would not be signing any books. What I thought I was going to get away with by bringing all of those books, I have no idea. But that was my meeting, my brief encounter with Haruki Murakami. I am so glad I asked him a question that got an actual answer rather than just, I like spaghetti. Well, that is an actual answer. It's just not a very interesting one. It's kind of that answer, by the way, it goes back to that Freud thing of like sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. But anyway, it was incredible. It was an incredible night. One of those great nights of my life that I'm so glad I took advantage of that at the time. Because I was a newly minted Haruki Murakami fan, I did not realize how reclusive he was, or how at least how hesitant of the spotlight he was. I didn't realize how detached he was from all of that, and how rare of an occurrence that was. That was incredible, and so I got to speak to him. I mean, it's so wild to think there are very few people on this earth I've known a lot in my work in the music industry and entertainment industry and all that. I've met a lot of famous people, and I have met a whole lot of famous people, interacted with some really incredible people, and I've never had, I have not gotten starstruck in a very long time, but it was so amazing to think that there was a time in my life for just a couple of minutes where I made direct eye contact with Haruki Murakami. I got to talk to him. I got to ask him this question and got this really good answer from him. And what's so interesting was, because again, this literary giant, but he's such a meek and mild, humble person in reality, that there was this interesting undercurrent in what he was telling me, where it felt like he really cares about, saying something of value to me. Like, there was kind of like this nodding, nodding approach that he had as he was speaking, where it was like, he's really concerned about, am I saying something of value to this person? Am I giving them a good answer to their question? The exact opposite of what I'm talking about would be when I went to an Yngwie Malmsteen guitar clinic, and somebody got up there and asked him, said, "How do you harmonize your guitar parts?" And he goes, "I just play the same thing 3 frets away, huh?" And that was, it was like it was the exact opposite of that. There was no arrogance, no hubris, nobody that was just drunk off, high off their own supply. It was this very humble person who really did care about, was really thinking like, I hope I'm giving you something of value here. Like, I really got that vibe from him. And if there would be anybody that could rest on his laurels, it would be him. It would be Haruki Murakami. And so that was the experience. It was incredible. And then after that, the Keikos and I were hungry, and so we went to this place up the road. We got a taxi and went to this place up the road was across the street from Harvard. I would assume it's still there. It's called the Garage Mall, and the Garage Mall was this thing that had obviously been some kind of large-scale auto parts garage type thing at some time or something, and they had gone in and gutted it and turned it into this multi-level shopping mall with all of these cool niche restaurants and stores and everything. And I remember they had an anime store that was all anime stuff. They had a store that was They had a store that was all science fiction, fantasy books, and everything. For a young nerd like myself, this was just hog heaven. Anyway, so after the event, we went to the Garage Mall to try to find something to eat. The only thing that was open was this place called Crazy Dough's Pizza, and Crazy Dough's was I don't know if the Crazy Dough's chain is still around. It was not very good pizza. It was one of those things like, you're a college kid and it's 2 a.m. or whatever, 11 at night or something, and you need something, that's when you go to Crazy Dough's. But it was not good pizza. But the whole Crazy Dough's marketing strategy was that they served reheated pizza. That was their thing. So what they would do is they would cook the pizza, take it fresh out of the oven, set it out, and let it get cool to room temperature, and then reheat it for you. Because, yes, we all love the unique taste of reheated pizza, but we love fresh pizza even more. But anyway, so that was their whole thing, reheated pizza. And I remember going up to the guy and saying, like, "Hey, do you still have pizza?" And he said, I've got pizza, man, but it's fresh out of the oven. I mean, we haven't had, I'm just getting this out to get ready for tomorrow. We haven't had time to reheat it or anything yet." And I was like, "That's fine. We'll take it. Well, it's the same price, man, but it hasn't been reheated. That's totally fine." Like, I don't understand the logic. But anyway, so the three of us sat down and we had dinner at Crazy Dough's, and that was the end of our evening. The Keikos dropped me off. The Keiko that they dropped me off at, we took a cab back and they dropped me off at my dorm, which was the Hemingway dorm, and they went off to wherever they lived. And the Keiko that I was interested in was not interested in me at all, but the other Keiko flirted with me a little bit, and if I hadn't been a young 20-something with my head up my ass, I would have pursued that. But anyway, so that was my story of how I met Haruki Murakami. It was one of the great nights of my life. If I have no children, but I can't imagine having the night or the day of having one of my children being born would ever surpass the thrill, the experience of meeting Haruki Murakami and getting to speak to him for a minute. So that was really cool, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to tell the story. Anyway, so like I said, if you want my recommendations, I think Hard-Boiled Wonderland and The End of the World is a great place to start with Murakami. It's a story like no other story you have ever read or will ever read, even within the Murakami catalog. Kafka on the Shore is Wind-Up Bird Chronicle is the one that most people will tell you to start with, and I think that should be your, if not your first book, at least your second book that you read by him. A lot of people will tell you to start with Kafka on the Shore. Kafka on the Shore is definitely magnum opus level, but it is dense like you cannot imagine. It is so complicated and so intricate and everything. And it just has all these fiendish multi-layers to it and everything. And so I would say be an established Murakami fan before you read that. And then, of course, the tetralogy of the Rat, which is Hear the Wind Sing, Pinball, Wild Sheep Chase, and Dance, Dance, Dance. Those are all incredible. Really, the only two that I would tell you not to start with would be Killing Commendatore and 1Q84. I liked Killing Commendatore. I enjoyed it a lot. But if you look on my channel, I have a series I used to do called Book Talk with Jordan and Stefan, and we did Killing Commendatore as one of the books, and it's that thing of like, Stefan had not read much Haruki Murakami before that. In fact, the only other thing he'd read had been the other Murakami book that we had done on the channel, so he didn't know much about Murakami. And being dropped into this one, being dropped into Killing Commendatore, sorry Jimmy, being knocked into Killing Commendatore, being dropped into that as like your first or an introduction to Murakami, would not recommend for this. Again, it's incredibly dense. I don't think it has the literary gravitas of some of his earlier works. It's an interesting, compelling read, but it's just it's just not the same. If that makes, I mean, it's something that if you're a beginning Murakami reader, you probably won't appreciate it that much, and if you're a long-standing Murakami reader, you'll feel like you've been down this road before. The only other book of his that I would not recommend, read it. These are not bad books. I have to emphasize that. It's the difference between like, a 4-star and a 5-star meal. I mean, these are great novels. I'm not knocking any of them. The only one that I've never been that crazy about is this one, 1Q84, and that's so funny to me because so many people say this is the magnum opus. This is like the best thing he's done. And I respectfully disagree because in my mind, I read this and I was super excited about it because it's like, great, we're getting back to, he'd done a lot of shorter novels like he had, but by this time he had put out After Dark. This is a great book, by the way, but it's a fairly short book, that kind of thing. And I wanted another brick. I wanted, like Wind Up Bird Chronicle, I wanted another brick from Murakami that I could just get lost in forever. And so 1Q84 came out, and I wanted it to be that book. And the problem is, it's it's again, it's that thing of like, for the first time, always you're going to have, with any creative person, you're going to have the brilliant early stuff that they do, and then you're going to have the later period stuff that still feels really good, but it's just not the same as like that early spark. And that was 1Q84 for me. This felt like, it felt less like Murakami just writing a book, and more like if you sat down and focus grouped what a Haruki Murakami novel is supposed to be. There's this thing called Murakami Bingo. You can look it up. It's a little editorial cartoon that came up. That's like all of the things, that all of the themes and familiar ideas that show up in Murakami writing and that sort of thing. And so people will play Murakami Bingo, and most of the books win Murakami Bingo in some direction. But anyway, this one, it was literally like he took that cartoon of Murakami Bingo, and it's like a checklist. I'm going to write a by the numbers Murakami book. And Murakami is not somebody that's supposed to be by the numbers. It's supposed to be like what I said about his quote. It's supposed to be spur of the moment. So anyway, it's things like, there are these two mythological entities mentioned in 1Q84 that are called the Maza and the Dota. And that's only, that sort of thing, that's only mysterious if you are not an English speaker and you don't realize that what he's actually saying is mother and daughter. So it's things like that. It didn't feel like, it didn't have the same magic. Killing Commendatore was better, and had a whole lot of just the surrealism, the otherworldly surrealism that I love in Murakami. I love the feeling of feeling like I'm plunging into this underground subconscious realm. This Killing Commendatore had that in spades. But again, like the magic stuff, the real magic is to be found in Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, to be found in the Wind Up Bird Chronicle, Kafka on the Shore, once you're established in the Murakami world and you know what you're doing. And it's this wonderful, beautiful, it's this wonderful, beautiful world, where dreamlike world, where it feels like David Lynch and F. Scott Fitzgerald and Raymond Chandler kind of, and all these other surreal, unlikely influences all come together in this magical dream world that's like nothing else. And so I still love Japan and Japanese culture. I'm still fascinated by it. Would still love to go there someday. But that initial spark of interest that I had in Japanese culture, I've moved on from that. I've moved on to other interests and other things in my life. But Murakami transcends all of that. Murakami is something else. It's kind of like, it would be kind of like saying, let's say you developed a passion for American newspaper cartoons, and even after your passion for American newspaper cartoons abates, Calvin and Hobbes is still something special. It's something unique unto itself, special, transcendentally special in that regard, and that's Haruki Murakami for me. It is an experience like no other. I've actually started now going back and rereading the classic Murakamis, rereading Hard-Boiled Wonderland, rereading Wind Up Bird, and that sort of thing. And it's so interesting to find all these new feelings and perspectives on it as I've gotten older and I've gotten more perspective. I'm now, especially because I am now the age of Murakami characters. So many Murakami characters are late 30s, early 40s, and I'm in that age bracket now. So being able to like read it with that perspective is so cool and so fascinating, and it's so weird to think about. But if you've not read Murakami, this won't make much sense. But reading Murakami, there's no other experience that can the act of sitting at home and reading a book while listening to jazz music feel like some sort of magical ritual. It's so wild. So incredible. Anyway, so that overall, though I could go on and on at length about Haruki Murakami, it was incredible getting to meet him. And Jimmy's probably got a concussion at this point. But anyway, it was so incredible getting to meet him. And again, it's one of those things where I just find myself in his writing. And like I said, he's my number 2 favorite author after Harlan Ellison. My number 3 is Douglas Adams. I could keep going. But anyway, it's an incredible experience. And highly, highly recommend his work, obviously. And I now, in retrospect, realize what a rare and beautiful privilege it was to get to meet him. So there you go.